PodCastle, episode 922 for Tuesday, the 16th of December, 2025. A Long Tango Across a Canopy of Whispering Leaves by Anita Satkunananthan. Read by Chang, produced by Eric Valdes, and rated PG. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to PodCastle, the flying castle of fantasy fiction. I'm your host, Eric Valdes, and it is my privilege to present for your enjoyment A Long Tango Across a Canopy of Whispering Leaves by Anita Satkunananthan and read by Chang Yiun. This story was previously published in Giganotosaurus, June 1st, 2020. Anita Satkunananthan is an author, poet, and post-colonial Gothic scholar who exists in a perpetual state of unheimlich. Anita writes Gothic fiction, cyberpunk, nerdcore post-apocalyptic fiction, planetary romance, and various other forms of hyphenated weird fiction. Anita's publishing credits include Clarkesworld, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Strange Horizons, and The Dark. Yiun is a fifth-generation Malaysian Chinese who speaks 4 different languages, all of them poorly, and is still a disappointment to their family, friends, and cow for not speaking another 2 more dialects. They intend to redeem themselves by learning how to eat chili. Only time will tell if they are successful in this endeavor. Now, pay attention, for our tale is about to begin, and all the old cues will come back to you if you listen.
A Long Tango Across a Canopy of Whispering Leaves by Anita Satkunananthan. The return of the last festival king was not mere rumor. Half a dozen heralds from Marip preceded his return, with a new summons from the steward. Dusk-skinned youth dressed in flowers and skin-tight fluorescent blue breeches had read the proclamations from east to west. The steward was returning the last festival king. A new festival king would be crowned at the duels. In the summons were also the names of 4 hopefuls, chosen from amongst the descendants of former kings. Melo's name had been listed as one of the candidates. It was not a surprise to Melo, who had been sleeping within the weave of the forest's consciousness for 25 years since the disappearance of her lover. For those years, the festival had been kingless. It was a gap that was unprecedented for the Mycologosia. There had been festivals for as long as there had been humans inhabiting the sentient mushroom dwellings. And there had always been kings. But now, there was to be another duel. And if Milo was chosen, she would be the one dueling her lover, as they had both promised each other that night. Milo stared up at the ceiling, which she had painted with elaborate scenes from the stories from various hikayat. Gallant and heroic in the garb of Panji, there was the woman warrior of Hikayat Panji Semarang, garbed in flair as a male-presenting warrior on the horse that she rode to rescue her lover, her mustachios smartly positioned against the nut-brown contours of her face. She painted the princess of Gunung Ledang, dressed in fine songket as she upbraided the Sultan of Malacca, who was heartless enough to want to spill his son's blood for her hand in marriage. She painted Tun Teja, who had been coerced away from her home to marry yet another Sultan of Malacca. In the center of the ceiling, she painted the holy Juntayu bird, iridescent and white. She had used the luminescent artist's paint that had been manufactured in the Mishkalaveri Vale and sold by art supplies shops that crammed together on Eldridge Street. Post-midnight and anti-sleep, The warrior princesses and holy birds multiplied on the ceiling, dancing across a line of vision with their gestures. They would manifest in the air around her and listen as she whispered to them her secrets, and as she wove into them spells with the aid of the sentient fungi home that had shaped itself in accordance to the dreams and wishes of the family it had allowed to inhabit its part mechanical, part organic depths. Milo's creations watched over her as she slept, as they always had, since she had learned that when she painted pictures, they would come to life. Sleep, however, could not come when the Festival King was returning in the morning, and not even her ethereal companions could distract her from the dragonflies that clustered within her, filling her both with panic and with a long-banked desire. Sleep could not halt the messages the forests wove into her unconscious, nor her battle with those forests, a battle that had continued for a quarter of a century. Long before the Festival King defeated his opponent and was awarded the living crown of the three sentient forests of Yuvejuri, Milo had known him as a quiet bicycle artisan who lived down the street. She worked in the restaurant next door run by their cousins, serving up a mixture of Minangkabau and Nyonya food to various hungry workers who made their living in that quarter. Yorick Lam had never wanted to be a Festival King, but the forests had chosen him. He had won the annual duel for the kingship with a look of profound surprise. The switch in his hand had transformed the old Festival King into a wizened woodwork creature that crept back into the embrace of the sighing trees of the forests that curved around the Mikolokosia. That wasn't expected, but it was a season of change for more than one person. The forests also sang their susurrating song inside Milo's head from that day onwards, haunting her with memories of Yorick and of their last tango together as humans. Have I become a murderer? Yorick Lam had asked Milo when she ran to him, raining kisses and tears upon his brow. He had knelt there in the arena, weeping ichor and tree sap as the living crown wove itself around his brow. He leaned against her form and cried into her belly as she stroked his hair, her fingers entangled every now and then by the riding crown that filled her head with the susurrus of the tree forests. If she could, she thought, she would hold the forest back. If she could, she would be a buffer, seeking to protect him from the remote darkness that banged in his eyes. An alien darkness, one that drove a wedge between them. No, Milo had said then, her voice strained as she pressed against the weight of millions of forest entities encroaching upon her grief-stricken mind. You were not to know that the rules had changed again. None of us could have guessed that the forest would claim the festival for itself. Later, the festivities spilled into the streets, lanes, and the back lanes of a city-state that had grown around mechanically augmented sentient fungi the size of houses, of mansions, of castles. Milo and Yorick found themselves back in Clearing 7, where all of the weekly tango lessons they had attended had been run by an Argentinian woman who supplied beeswax candles and soaps to more than one shop in the Mikolokosia. Flowing into the position of the Apilado, Milo and the Festival King could hear and feel each other's breath, and their hearts beat almost in unison. Their eyes locked as their limbs moved with the practiced rhythm of familiarity. Proximity was as natural as the slide of skin over sanguine flesh and ivory white bone. They had been neighbors, and then dance partners. They had been friends who had slipped easily into the routine of lovers. They slid into the embrace of the abbraccio abierto with the ease of familiarity, his hand on her waist, hers on his upper arm. The relaxed proximity was a familiar one, but it was charged tonight, with the frisson of 1,000 whispers moving up and down Milo's bare skin. As she shivered, Yorick said, "The forest danced with us tonight, and that's quite an embrace." "Yes, I can feel them with every step we take," Milo admitted. Arboreal chaperones. I've never been so curtailed. Yorick laughed down at her upturned face. The blunt contours of his already weather-beaten features lit up in the enjoyment of the tango. He laughed, but there was a tinge of panic in that laugh. Soon, their shared intimacy lapsed into a watchful silence, as the alien awareness that simmered within his irises wove and unwove filaments of what used to be Yorick before Melo's eyes. "My father repaired bicycles in Ipo long before we all moved here," he said, apropos of nothing, this new Yorick who seemed to shift more than one consciousness as they danced. It was almost as though she had never known his family history. But this version of her lover seemed to be untethering himself from the past with every breath, with every syllable dropped, as though they were conversing for the first time. To alleviate his sadness and dim fear, Milo decided to play along with the conversation, hoping the normalcy would turn Yorick back into the man she had loved for so long. "How many centuries ago was that?" she asked, taunting him ever so slightly, as though they were at their weekly dance lessons. "Well, I'm not that old, and you know it." His laughter curled around them, a rueful note against the music that was their cue for the volcada. Yorick was still laughing when she rested her weight on him in a half-lean. He twirled slightly further away than recommended for the figure, causing her to almost stumble. It felt deliberate, an unkindness Yorick had never visited upon her in all of their dance classes together. There was a breathless moment when she wondered if he was going to drop her. His eyes with liquid danger stirred true with seduction, but they were not just his eyes anymore. Thousands upon thousands of tree spirits crowded brown irises. She felt them pressing against the inner walls of her skull. Milo willed the consciousness of those tree spirits away. This dance was theirs, and it had to matter. She allowed him to bend her body and sway them left and then right, in curved precision as they transitioned into the media luna. The tension between their bodies was a familiar tension that would reach across the years they knew each other, the years they had lost each other, and the fateful day when they would dance their final duel 25 years later. Being a festival king had transformed him in a way that she desired to be transformed. "Well, it is a valid question. Kings of the festival are supposed to be theoretically immortal," she said, even though she had proof within Sabrazzo that her lover was now, indeed, immortal. The proof shivered up and down her arms. It filled them both with electricity beyond their usual chemistry. She felt her heartbeat recede and then spike in an oddly staccato rhythm. She felt as though the air was thickening within her lungs, turning into liquid sap. And yet they danced, even as the festival king transformed, and even as she herself was being transformed. Still, they carried out the semblance of normalcy. What else could old lovers do on a night like this? It's all theoretical and only theoretical these days. The crown passes on to the next king, so it is the idea of the king that remains immortal, not the human representatives. Before either of us were born, kings would die at the end of their term. Nyla stopped that law, as with all other laws she considered barbaric. But what happened just now? Oh, heavens. Melo, what happened earlier? I did not expect that. The old Yorick would knit himself into the partner who trembled against her fingers even as they danced. His eyes burning into hers with desperate intensity, they muttered, "Save me. Please, save me." If only she knew how, thought Melo then. A thought that would haunt her for a quarter of a century. Milo shivered even as he leaned his forehead against hers. "My grandmother lived," she said. Milo's grandmother had been the king long before the last festival king had absconded with the ceremonial scepter and the teak wood crown. There were black and white photos of Fatima Saleh dressed in a smart tuxedo, smoking a cigar while wearing the riding living crown jauntily on her neat head, sporting flapper curls which accentuated her high cheekbones and her coal-lined eyes. Fatima ruled the festival every year until the end of her 5-year term, and was seen around the protectorate sporting very smart tuxedos with that crown. When her reign ended, she returned the crown to the festival council, but everyone remembered her as the most glamorous and the most beloved festival king who ever lived. Yorick's exhalation against her brow was as pensive as the elegant melody that dipped and knocked around them as they moved, fluid as nights of repressed desire. I remember her. Fatima Saleh, our radiant king in tuxedo and tails. Yes, she lived, and none of us will ever understand why. Perhaps she was simply too beautiful to kill. But every deposed festival king after that lived. Every one of them. Until this afternoon. Until whatever that was happened. Oh, this hurt of always feeling never up to the mark. Milo flinched against the remembrance of jibes that asserted that she was not as lovely as her grandmother or her mother. But those jibes had not been Yorick's, had never been his, and he was too contorted by his own grief to notice the pain that racked her own form, a surprise even to herself. But there were other surprises. Yorick, whether the new Yorick or the one she loved, was not insensitive to her needs. He said, "You have eyes, and that jaw, and your beauty is of a different sort, incandescent with passion and with need. You have always undone me with your fire. You'd make an unforgettable festival king. Are you willing to be king next term?" Even now he read her so well. Even now, with the forest crowding his eyes as much as they crowded Milo's own head with their whispered incantations. Or perhaps the deal had already been sealed when she ran towards him as he knelt in that clearing, weeping. A 2-for-1 kind of deal, one might say. "No, I don't think I'll be ready next term," Milo had said. Doubt laced through her movements in tandem with his, their bodies sliding with ease into the rhythm set by the band that played on the side of the clearing. Colorful paper lanterns raining eldritch patterns of light cut by shadows against the serious faces of the musicians. "But you want to be king, don't you?" He read the wish in her eyes so clearly. She wondered if her need was so transparent, or if that was just the force speaking through him, speaking into her. "When I'm ready, yes." "When you're ready," he echoed. "When you're ready, my Milo, I will be there. God help me, and Boris willing, I will be there." "And I will be ready to fight for you," she replied, her tone half fierce as her hands gripped his upper arms so desperately that he winced in pain. Yorick disappeared that night, along with the living wildwood crown that had writhed upon his brow, even as he led Milo into their final embrace, and a kiss that was meant to last a quarter-century. She would be haunted by that dance in her dreams, both while asleep and while awake, cooking various Minang and Hainanese dishes in their cafe, serving it, and listening to the susurrus of the wind troubling the trees of the numerosium somnium. "Where are you, Yorick?" She would whisper this to herself, even as the trees sang to her about an arboreal surrender. Kananga was stirring chicken congee on the stove when Milo entered the kitchen the next morning. Her sister looked up in acknowledgement, her eyes reddened with the telltale signs of tears. Her brother was busy slicing spring onions to garnish the congee, a strained look on his usually cheerful face. A small stack of julienne young ginger was arranged at the edge of his wooden chopping board. Miller placed a fresh bunch of coriander she had picked from the vegetable herb garden lot they shared with 4 other families who lived around Clearing 50 next to Raslan's chopping board. A bowl of salted eggs waited for her attention at the opposite end of the long kitchen table. Grabbing a small knife, she halved and then quartered the eggs in their shells. "Can't you run away from this, Miller?" her brother Raslan asked, his face made longer by his grim expression of woe. "Where would I run?" Miller asked. "Aina says it would be a good idea. She'd know what to do," said Kananga. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but much of the speculation is just that, speculation. There's no real evidence to suggest that there will be fights to the death. Why would the steward? He has a grudge against the guardian, remember? And she's been mostly absent these past 5 years," Raslan said as he rose up and grabbed a bowl full of deep-fried anchovies and peanuts. Miller said, "Nothing ventured, nothing gained. You know I want to become the festival king." "I rather wish you didn't, Melo. There are other ways to honor our grandmother, sayang," Kananga said as she ladled the congee into rice bowls. "Please, don't do this. You're our eldest sister. You're all we have." "This isn't about Nene, Kananga. I want to be festival king. For myself," said Milo, who was tight-lipped from trying to keep the constant susurrus in her head at bay. She sounded selfish, she thought to herself. Sounded like she was giving up her family on a whim. But she had a 25-year-old commitment. "I just don't understand why it means so much to you," Raslan said, as he poured steaming milk tea from one enamel mug to another in a long stream of liquid for their morning tetarik. These familiar acts of morning domesticity, oh, how they hurt. They were a reproachful reminder of how these communal acts of making breakfast had bonded them after they had lost their parents. None of you ever could. But I don't blame you. I don't really understand it myself. But I feel it. The same way I feel the forest strumming inside me, said Melo, finally voicing what had been unvoiced for so long. "The forest? Like what?" Raslan began, then stopped. His eyes shuttered in dismay and quiet horror. "It happened when Yorick became Festival King. I had known since then. I'm sorry," said Milo. The fungi home they lived in seemed to shudder around them as she said the words. Then they were embalmed in the sound of rustling leaves. "Well," said Kananga, sighing, "there's that. You've always been the most attuned to our home, so perhaps this goes beyond even my understanding of Raslan's. I feel so helpless. Is there nothing we can do?" "Yes, there is one thing you can do, Kananga." "What is it you wish, Katmelo?" asked Kananga as she threw Raslan a long look. Melo inhaled, not even pushed to chuckle at the moment. "You can trust me," she finally said. Kananga nodded, even as she pulled Raslan into a half-hug, half-chokehold, and pulled in Melo for a group hug. "Ah! That hurts! Kananga! Don't you dare do anything foolhardy next." "Sumpah, Kaka, I won't. I've never been particularly adventurous anyway." They sat down to eat the chicken congee with frothy teh tarik, liberally sweetened with condensed milk and with a 1-inch froth that gave the siblings identical tea moustaches. As they ate, they were silent. Milo wondered if they were all similarly thinking about their Hainani's mother, long perished in one of the assassinations that took place 30 years ago. Their father, a stoic Minang Malay man, had outlived his wife by only 5 years before his heart expired on him. 5 years was too long a time to outlive the love of his life, he had whispered, before he closed his eyes for the last time. She lifted her head to meet her brother's eyes. He took a deep breath and nodded at her once before leaning over to grab her hands in a fist. We can't lose you too, Melo. We only have each other. Try your best not to... I don't even know what I'm asking. But try. Try. Please. Melo nodded, not daring to say more. Within her, more secrets in the depth and the breadth of the forests. Within her lay the scrolling vistas she had painted on murals and on ceilings, of Minang and Javanese princesses and Panjis, of the weight and strength of their combined heritages, of spell work and of the sheer, desperate need for survival. Kananga let out the air she had been holding in. Her exhalation sounded like a sob. She held her sibling's hands in her large and capable hands. I'll be manning the weapon stall right next to the duel clearing. So if you're in need, I'll be on standby, said Raslan, clearly not able to give in. Don't do anything foolish, Lan. It's probably not even necessary, Kananga said, clearly not able to give in to optimism. Kananga had volunteered to be one of the officials at the ceremony. Another gesture meant so a rescue could be made, Milo supposed. She stood up and stretched before taking her emptied bowl. She could not destroy whatever it was they needed to cope, to survive this day. No, don't worry, Milo. I'll wash up. Go and get ready, said Kananga. What would I do without the two of you? Milo said. Rasan laughed. Now I know you're not as nonchalant about this as you claim to be. Not like you to be sentimental. Milo made a face at him for about a second, before he engulfed her in a second bear hug. Honestly, her family had never been this needily demonstrative before. She squeezed him back, her hands making awkward patting gestures. Go put on that killer tux, Kak Melo, and try not to die, said Raslan. Kananga's face was resolute. Remember, Melo, survive, don't submit. Melo said, Thanks, my loves. And you too, remember the same. Melo made her way to the open-air arena where the duels were to be held. She had watched the duels more than once. It did not really require combatants to be proficient, as the switches they were given were magicked. The outcome was rarely dependent on ability, merely on luck. Once, those switches were fatal. And then for many decades, centuries even, they were only for show. Until the afternoon, when Yorick had held a switch that turned the man into something eldritch, something irreversible. She walked through the crowd to the contenders' row and found her seat. She looked at the other contenders. The Mikolokosia was big, but not densely populated, so most people knew each other. She sat next to Kieran Lee, who looked morose as he considered the dueling arena. Another candidate. I see my ritual's the more well-known amongst us, or the more infamous, Kieran said, tacitly acknowledging that, once upon a time, he had been accused of the mass murders that had occurred around the same time that Yorick had disappeared. He had been exonerated by evidence and an ironclad alibi, but that did nothing to stop the gossip and the speculative, fearful glances. Milo remembered Yorick telling her that Kieran's grandfather and his father had been friends in Ipo, but Kieran had found his own way onto Yuredjiri. When we arrived on Yuredjiri, we were often surprised at who else found their way here through one of the apertures from the world that we left. He'd said one of those evenings after dance class, when they were still pretending they were just friends. I suppose it was the same for my great-grandparents when they arrived. So many friends and old lovers eventually turned up, Milo said. Perhaps that is a truth about this world we inhabit. Friends and old lovers always seem to turn up, said Kieran, his voice thoughtful as they sat side by side on a stone bench, watching the flickering lanterns reflect the trunks of the forest that lay just beyond the Mikologosia. Melo brushed back the memory that lurked at the edges of her consciousness. The candidates were all about the same age, except for Mariani, who had been in the protectorate for far longer than the rest of them. The Javanese businesswoman smoked a thick cheroot, her thickly lined eyes darting to the left and right in apprehension. No telling why we're here, or how the steward will change the rules, commented Larkin as he sat down next to her. He pushed back his turban and stretched out his jean-clad long legs, sighing in a despondent manner. Larkin Singh had been their neighbor for many years and had helped the family countless times after their parents had died. He was a poet, when he wasn't running a chai shop for the day trippers who visited Uredgery. His name, he told people, was what his father had given him at birth, because Philip Larkin had been a favorite poet. But Melo reckoned it was nobody's business but his and his parents. I don't think this is supposed to be an honor, Melo said with doubt. I know it's not, Kieran said, cursing under his breath. This is all such a huge bother. I have so much work to do up at Domus Exilis, now that Isla's gone on one of her trips again. Melo asked him curiously, what's it like working for her? Kieran said, she's pretty easygoing on her own estate, actually, and she's been around less and less these days. I've pretty much taken over most of her duties. Is that why you're here today? No, I have no idea why I was chosen, to be honest. Around them flew banners for various stalls. The arena was bedecked with ribbons and flowers trailing up poles that held up a canopy of sparkling lights, leaves, and flower chains. It resembled, or tried to emulate, the steward's bower deep within Nemus Anime, one of the tree forests that lay within his domain, Milo thought, remembering her one trip within the Nemus Anime when she had been a teenager. Was this a compulsion or an attempt at conciliation? The crowd hushed, signifying the arrival of the steward. Melo was almost afraid to look up, but a strong impulse drew her eyes. Everyone knew that the summons were a sign that the steward was displeased with the Mikologosia. But in truth, the fairies, Benungu, and other creatures of his domain were as unhappy with the folk of the Mikologosia, never mind that many of them were not human. The steward himself entered the clearing, followed by a train of non-human creatures from more than one region of Terra Cognita. There were nymphs and apsaras. There were the fairies from the British Isles and from Brittany. There were the more Persian Peri. There were the owl women of the Malay archipelagos and the Kinari from Thailand and the north of Malaysia. A brightly painted palanquin carried by 6 burly men arrested her attention. Yorick sat there. He no longer had his Cantonese pop star looks, but his face had a leaner, hungrier slant to it. His skin was deeply tanned, and his hair fell down to his back in a wild tangle of waves and braids that looked like tangled lianas. Milo met his startled eyes with an inward clench. She wondered what she looked like to him now, after 25 years. The steward stopped in the middle of the arena and clapped his hands. His entourage gathered around him. Yorick's palanquin was lowered to the ground. Nearly a century ago today, your guardian, Ayla da Silva, decreed that no more deaths would be allowed in the duels for each new festival king, said Marib, as he surveyed the crowd through his deep-set almond eyes, his lips pursed with mild disapproval on a smooth face of mahogany brown. I acquiesced at the time because there was no sense in arguing with her. But, he said as he beckoned to Yorick, this is no mere crown, and was carved from no mere tree. It requires its rewards, Marit continued. And so I plucked the last festival king, from your midst, so he could serve in the stead of the spirits who would have been made from those deaths, as you called them. And were they not deaths indeed, Marip? Asked another voice. A firm, angry voice. Kieran laughed quietly next to Milo. I knew it, he said. I knew Isla couldn't keep away. It's likely that he knew that as well. That is why he chose you. She'd not let anything happen to the one she took in as a foster son, said Mariani, her enunciated syllables as sour as pickled lime. By her side was her teenage daughter, Vita, dressed in denim dungarees as she loomed over her mother in a gesture of protection. So, this was an act of provocation? Milo asked softly, as her eyes met Yorick's across the clearing. Recognition flashed across his face as he stared at her. Milo breathed slowly, willing herself not to run to him. Memories of all their conversations, of the times when their tangled limbs mimicked the gestures of the dances that were a mere prelude to their union within the modest covers of his bed. They were not deaths, Isla, and you would have known that if you truly understood about us folk of the forest. Look at my court. Isla and the rest of the spectators stared at the various figures, recognizable as previous festival kings, thought to be dead or deposed. The portraits of the festival kings lined the Museum of the Elders, and most of them were recognizable from other works of art that were sold on Artists' Row. Some of them had wings now, and others had horns growing from their foreheads. All of them had changed. Even Yorick, with his gleaming eyes and the vines that twirled themselves around his lean, tattooed body. I have become something else, not human, Isla said, her voice soft. They were chosen because they wanted to cross over, Isla. The guardian stepped forward into the light, now visible to everyone. She pushed back the head of her cloak, the most solidly human presence in the whole arena. Her kuning langsat skin gleamed with health, while her muscled, stocky body betrayed the strength of someone who trained and who was poised for action. It was no surprise why this woman was allowed to preside over an entire island, Milo mused. She also mused that most of the gossip in the protectorate had to be wrong. Marip did not seem enraged at all by Isla. He seemed concerned and wryly amused. You do know there's no way Isla would have been guardian if the different stewards had not agreed, right? Kieran whispered in her ear. Yes, that much is true. But why did they agree? She's not even from here. Milo whispered back to Kieran. Most of us are not from here. This island has more exiles on it than indigenes. All of us. Even the fairies, as they are known on Terra Cognita. Even the dragons. We all came here because we needed to run away from something. As did our parents. Or our great-grandparents. Milo said softly. I forgot that you're fourth generation. Some days, even I forget, Kieran. What do you think will happen to us now? Whispered Larkin, as he stood closer to them. I think we're about to find out, said Mariani. Vita, step back now. I don't want the steward noticing you. Too late, Ibu, said Vita, with a slight edge in her tone, as Marvip ambled over to them. She saluted him smartly. Good afternoon, sir, Vita said, as he turned to her. Hello, Vita. When are you coming over to my grove again? I've got some repairs that need attending, Marip said, giving her a lazy smile. I can be there tomorrow if you like, said Vita. Beside her, Mariani bristled. Relax, Mariani. Your daughter's safe from vying for kingship. She's far too useful as she is, Marip said. What do you want from us? What if we don't want to be king? Mariani said. Are you sure you don't want to be king, Ibu? Vita asked her mother in a skeptical voice. Sayang, in case you haven't noticed, I'm plenty powerful in Mykologosya. I do not, however, have a death wish. Melo wondered if her grandmother and Mariani had been friends. Her grandmother, who had been spared death as king, and who had died the natural way, surrounded by her grandchildren. That was probably best, Melo thought. She did not think her Debonoa grandmother would have liked becoming a non-human entity. She looked again at Yorick. He remained in the center of the clearing. Well, who would like to do the duel with Yorick, knowing full well what's ahead? Not death, right? Asked Larkin. Not death, Isla said, her voice firm. Marip nodded at her. Not death. But failure will lead to banishment from the Mykologosya. You will be claimed by one of my forests. I'll do it, said Melo suddenly. Melo, no! Rastan ran up to her. Look, we always knew it was going to be me. I've been preparing for this since that night, and if it's me who's chosen to be king, the rest of them will be spared. And if it is not you, Melo? Marip asked, his eyes intent on her. Then the rest get better odds of survival, Melo said, meeting his intense, inhuman gaze with her calm eyes. Marip nodded. Go, then. He's waiting for you. They are waiting for you. Melo walked to the center of the clearing in her tuxedo and tails. Her ikal mayang hair was knotted neatly at the nape of her neck as she reached Yorick. His eyes gleamed at her as his hands claimed hers. Dance or duel, my lover? He asked her, as their bodies moved together, poised for one or the other. Or both, Melo said. Both, Yorick agreed, as they danced a duel that required neither the light armor that her brother had made for her to wear beneath her clothes, nor the eldritch crown that rested on his head. They continued what had been interrupted 25 years ago by a summons both of them could hear. All of the voices, all of the intersecting histories dimmed as the duel was fought by the soon-to-be deposed festival king and the incumbent king. None of them mattered to Melo and Yorick, not the members of the steward's court that clustered around them, not the ethereal heroines of Melo's painted hikayats who materialized as Melo pulled out her paintbrush and threw a handful of paint powder into the air, shimmering with afterimages of her protective spells from her craft. The Bidadaris, the Bunyan admirals, the Panjis from various hikayats crammed the spaces between the couple and the forests, facing outwards with silver spears. The Garudas multiplied into fractals of avian warriors poised for battle. All of the forests of Uregiri, all of the sentient mushroom dwellings of the Mykologosya trembled in that moment. But all Melo could see was the question and the promise that was in Yorick's gaze. Are you ready for whatever this battle brings? She asked her lover. I trust you to do what is best for the both of us, he said simply. The new king defeated the old king. And that was all the stories would tell. The rest of it could only be resolved deep within the groves of spirits and of souls who had strayed away from the confines of humanity. The truth of it was only this. Two bodies entwined together, neither human, nor animal, nor plant, just an iridescent weave of souls forever twisting and twining within each other, deep within the forests of dreams and nightmares. There were no more festival kings. There could be no more, once the forests had finally collected what was owed to them. But these trees that rooted themselves in the heart of the forests opened upwards to a firmament of stars. Upwards, where two shimmering forms tangled across the tops of trees, as though the canopy of leaves that kissed the night sky had been created to be their dance hall. In the world of their dance, that canopy spread from horizon to horizon, while Garudas and shimmering warriors chased shooting stars and comets above them.
And welcome back. That was A Long Tango Across a Canopy of Whispering Leaves by Anita Satkunananthan. And if you liked that, she also wrote episode 620, When Hope is Lost, Touch Remains. And of course, you can find a great deal more, including links to her novel Water Myth at mythopoetica.com. The author had this to say about the story. A Long Tango Across a Canopy of Whispering Leaves is set in Eredfree, and some of the main characters of my award-winning debut novel Water Myth appear in it. But mostly, this story exists because of my abiding love for the tango as a classical guitarist, and because of my furious disagreement with Fraser's The Golden Bough. I wanted to provide an alternate kind of resolution to the ritual at Nemi. This tale is also a love letter to all of the nostalgic trappings of a Gen X Malaysian childhood and teenhood. Thank you, Anita, for the story and the thoughts. As readers of the otherworldly, those of us who tread the paths unheimlich, we learn to accept that which is alien to us and glean its significance from its context in the story. And this skill, this habit, is a double-edged enchanted sword when enjoying speculative tales from outside one's own learned cultural context. Was that thing I didn't know about an authorial invention or part of general education in places I haven't lived? I was born and raised in a particular part of the United States to a Cuban-American family in a city where Caribbean culture dominates, was educated by at least two sets of colonizing cultures. As such, when I read my partner Valerie's books, which feature characters in a similar context, I feel the touches of home, the bits of crossover language, the very particular pest problems that could seem outrageous or fabricated to readers in Wisconsin or Romania. I'm always delighted and frustrated to wade through a secondary world split off from a primary world I know little about. I tend to take notes while reading and then end up falling down a bottomless research rabbit hole. And I was a kid who could spend all day with my parents' secondhand set of World Book encyclopedias, even if they were 25 years out of date, waiting to be reunited with a curious, loving reader. Malaysia and the surrounding region have been a crossroads for thousands of years. Its indigenous people colonized and recolonized by various Asian and European powers, shifting tides of dominant culture and language and religion and political ideology, resulting in a possibly unparalleled cosmopolitan melange that we see reflected here in the global mytho-ethnicities of the Fae Court, as well as in Anita's multi-ethnic human characters, who are mostly not from here, but found their way to this world and made it their home. But all the references to legendary gender-fluid Javanese warriors and Argentine dance moves in a fungal city serve to ornament and enhance what is at its core a love story. A wish fulfillment romance, where the lovers are invited to fulfill a secret desire to transcend their mortal forms, even as a sacrifice to save their people from domination by supernatural forces. And in doing so, are united for eternity. I'm grateful in a world where we must so frequently see people torn apart for no reason, to have been offered this magical reunion. This catharsis that, in hereditary, breaks at least one cycle of abuse. When your duel is a dance, it is clearly a win-win situation. Spore 1 for the Mycologosia. That was our show for this week. On behalf of everyone at PodCastle, your co-editors, Wanini Kimemia and Devin Martin, assistant editor, Caitlin Zavanovich, regular host Matt Dovey, and our many wonderful first readers, Andrew K. Ho, Baluan Conte, Craig Jackson, Emalia Harrington, Habiba Dokubo, Julia Pat, Kieran Corsaini, Tanya Bari, Tarver Nova, Tierney Bailey, Ziv Wheaties, and myself, Audiomancer Eric Valdes. Thank you for letting us share another story with you. PodCastle has long survived on donations alone, and even though there's ads now, subscribing through our Patreon remains the best way to ensure that we can keep bringing you one story told well. And if you subscribe at the $7 tier, you can get rid of the ads again. So if you'd like to support what we and the rest of Escape Artists do, please join our Patreon at patreon.com/EAPodcasts through your browser to avoid paying the App Store fees. Prefer another method? There are details for supporting us via Twitch, Amazon Prime, Ko-fi, and PayPal on escapeartists.net, or you can reach out directly by email at donations@escapeartists.net with any questions, and someone will get back to you. The legal bit. PodCastle is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can share it, and please do. But you cannot sell it, and you cannot change it. If you want specifics, check creativecommons.org. Our music is by Shiva in Exile. We'll be back next Tuesday with another fantastic tale. In the meantime, you might care to check out our sister podcasts, Escape Pod for science fiction, Pseudopod for horror, Cast of Wonders for YA speculative fiction, and Cat's Cast for speculative cat stories. If your heart belongs to us, though, we'll see you next week. Be safe and be kind.
They are drunk with demonic delusions, an ocean of measureless qualities in an ocean of joy, our most cherished and long-felt desire. Let the might of your compassion arise to bring a quick end to the flowing stream of the blood and tears.